Hi, everybody. This is Mr. Shook, your journalism teacher, and today is September 2nd, 2020. Today, we will be talking about legitimate news sources and the Journalism Code of Ethics. Now, the reason why I wanted to talk about this is because I wanted us all to be familiar with how to distinguish news sources from being legitimate to being illegitimate. First and foremost, I wanted to remind you guys that the goal of a journalist is to strive for unbiased, legitimate publication. Right, there are many forms of falsified news, and today's lesson will go over how we can, again, kind of pick out what news is fake and what news is real. Did you know that there is a code of ethics for journalists? The Society of Professional Journalists has published the SPJ Code of Ethics, and in it there are 4 main tenets, and I've summarized these 4 here for you. The first of these is to seek truth and report it. Basically, I want you to take responsibility for the accuracy of your work, and I don't want you to ever plagiarize. It's not cool to do, and it's not appropriate to do in your classrooms, and you certainly don't want to do it in the professional world, in the news world. If you get information from another source, cite it. Make sure that everybody who reads your news, whatever it may be, knows where you got your information from. The second is that you want to minimize harm. The public has a need for information, and they have a right to know. But you need to balance that with understanding that what you write, what stories you might write on, have a potential to harm or cause discomfort for various groups of people. You don't want to necessarily sugarcoat the news, and you don't want to tell things that aren't true. But you do want to be sensitive and mindful about what you write and how you write it, so that people who might be negatively affected by this news can understand what you're writing and can read it without being thrown into a tizzy. For instance, let's say that you were a French journalist on September 12th, 2001. Do you know what major worldwide event happened the day before? Right, the terrorist attacks on America, the destruction of the Twin Towers, also known as 9/11. So if you're a French journalist covering world news and you are talking about this event, well, naturally, the French, while they might be mortified at such an event happening, they might feel sympathy. Just about however you write that news is not going to affect them the way that it might affect an American reading your story. And so you need to use language that would be mindful and considerate of how, again, an American reading international coverage of 9/11 might feel at that time. So that's what we mean by minimize harm, is just being sensitive, just being mindful of how your readers might react to your work. You also want to act independently. You want to avoid what we call conflict of interest. You want to refuse favors and gifts for stories. For instance, many journalists will experience maybe an event organizer coming to them and saying, "Hi, we'll give you a gift card to your favorite restaurant if you come and cover our story." Well, the problem with that is that if that person is giving you a gift card to your favorite restaurant for you to come out and cover their story, they're going to expect you to paint their story in a positive light. And you're probably going to want to really make sure that you talk up that side of the story if you take a bribe like that. And so we want to avoid bribes. I'm not saying that you want to be negative of every story that you write, but you want to be neutral. You want to be completely neutral. For instance, to my sports fans out there, if you get hired for ESPN and you are tasked with covering the Iron Bowl, right? They ask you to write a preview story about this year's matchup for the Iron Bowl. Well, any of my Alabama fans who are virtual students and any of my Auburn fans who are virtual students should, according to the Code of Ethics, abstain, should refuse to write a preview story for the Iron Bowl. Because let's be real, my Alabama fans, would you not be tempted to write the story in a really positive light for Alabama and a really negative light for Auburn? And Auburn fans, be real, wouldn't you do the opposite? Wouldn't you paint Auburn to be a really good team and Alabama to be a poor team or an overrated team or any kind of negative light. So you want to act independently. You want to avoid this, what we call, again, a conflict of interest. And finally, you want to be accountable and transparent. Listen, guys, it's okay to make mistakes in journalism and in life. We're human. We make mistakes. That's what we do. However, what I want you to do is hold yourself to a high standard. I want you, as both a journalist and as a student and as a person, to be willing to admit when you make a mistake, take the heat on it. It's not every mistake has to have an excuse. Not every mess up has to have a reason outside of quite simply you just messed up, and that's okay. But acknowledge any mistakes that you make, and if you can fix it, fix it. And if you can't, just work to do better next time. But that is the Society of Professional Journalists Code of Ethics. Now let's talk about some illegitimate news. There are 3 particular types of this illegitimate news, and they're not all equal. However, they all must be acknowledged and kept in mind when you're reading the news. The first of these is satire or parody, and then we have tabloid news, and then we have, quote, fake news. Now, satire or parody is a form of news created by comedians and social critics. They present their news, I apologize for that camera shake, they present their news in what appears to be legitimate formats, but the news is often purposefully meant to be outrageous. Parody is used to get people laughing. It is strictly comedy. Satire is used to promote some sort of social change, but it also uses humor to get the point across. In fact, oftentimes satire is mistaken as comedy because people can point out the funny elements, the comedic elements of satire, but they forget that there's meant to be some sort of social change that comes as a result. One of the most popular parody or satire news websites is called The Onion, and it's been around for about 3 decades now, pushing 25, 30 years. Here's a headline from a recent Onion article. Ian McKellen, the famous English actor, Ian McKellen waiting in line at Buckingham Palace Administrative Office to get knighthood renewed before it expires. Well, it's meant to be kind of funny because it's pointing out that we all are waiting in lines, and we actually, I mistyped it. The original headline also says he's waiting in line while wearing a mask, because we're all waiting in line and we're all wearing masks right now to get his knighthood renewed before it expires. Guys, knighthood does not expire. If an English person is granted the title of knight, then they will have knight for their entire life. But it's meant to be funny. It's meant to be a joke and to poke some fun at the world that we're living in, to get us laughing. Now, tabloid news is a kind of journalism that seeks to promote gossip and untrue rumors, especially about celebrities. Some of the more famous tabloids include The Globe and The National Enquirer, and they drive their sales mostly on scandals breaking. Maybe this celebrity was photographed doing drugs or acting a fool in public when really they weren't. Most, if not all, of these stories are untrue. They drive their sales based on gossip and untrue rumors. They also break the code of ethics because one of the earlier codes, the very first one, when we say seek out information, oftentimes tabloids will pay people for their information, and that is against the code of ethics. You are not supposed to pay people for the news. News is meant to be freely accessible. Now, on here you see I have a point that reads, these are your cash register magazines. You've seen these when you're at the grocery store with your parents and you're at the checkout line, and you see these magazines all around of some sort of scandal or some sort of bad thing that a celebrity is doing, secrets that they've been hiding, a lot of loud colors and bold fonts. These are tabloids, and again, these are mostly, if not always, untrue. The information was gained unethically, and you want to avoid tabloid news. Now, finally, we have quote-unquote fake news. Now, you've probably heard this term spoken by our president, Donald Trump, and it does have its place in the journalism world. The term does. Fake news has its place in the journalism world. Fake news is news that is presented as legitimate, full, complete news. It will include some indisputable facts about a story. There are legitimate elements of quote unquote fake news. The news becomes fake when it begins pushing a particular agenda. Maybe statistics begin to be warped, or rumors are taken as fact about a particular story in order to appeal to a particular audience. Now, these agendas can be political, right? We see that all the time when we see newspapers nowadays or watch the TV nowadays, but they can also be athletic or technologically related or anything. Anything that has a side can push a particular agenda. For instance, again, if you are a sports fan if you're an Alabama fan covering the Iron Bowl, and you start writing your preview story and you just coincidentally, oh goodness, misrepresent some of Auburn's stats and throw in a jab at Auburn, that would be fake news. Now, it would be true when you write that they are playing in either Auburn or in Tuscaloosa, whatever year that you're writing the preview story. It would be true what time they're going. It would be true if you listed the all-time series as far as who's winning and who's not winning. But when you keep introducing these facts that are warped or particularly meant to persuade one side or to lean towards one side or another, that's when you start to fall into fake news territory. Anything can have a side in it. iPhone versus Apple, if you're writing a technology blog, right? If you're writing a technology blog and you just love the iPhone and you are an Apple person, then when Samsung releases a new smartphone, you might purposefully or even accidentally, to a degree, if you do it accidentally, it just drives more reason to cite your sources. But if you start dogging on and bashing Samsung's newest phone because you're an Apple person, well, now you're starting to tread into fake news territory if you spread lies about the new Samsung device. So I have a question for you guys then. How do we combat fake news? Read a lot. Read news stories from opposing news stations. Do not stick to just one particular news site, particularly if you're reading national news. Every newspaper is going to have a different spin. And again, I apologize for my fingers coming in and whatnot. Again, this has become the most efficient way for me to get these videos to you. But read a lot. Read stories that paint one side in a good light, the other side in a good light. Try to find neutral newspapers. AP, the Associated Press, is a very good newspaper, a very good news site when it comes to finding truly neutral information. But even then, you want to be careful because individual people are still biased and they still have their own biases. Look for your sources as well. If you're reading what appears to be a news site that seems to be fairly biased, but it seems like their sources are still kind of painted one side or another, check out the sources that they're using. See if you're covering, an Alabama-Auburn game, an Iron Bowl, and you're only getting Alabama players and Alabama coaches' interviews. Well, you want to check the sources. You want to make sure that you're getting a good balance. Again, consider the people being interviewed. Do these particular people have a vested interest in making sure that their product looks good? If you're covering if you're covering an iPhone press release, and naturally you're going to be, if you're covering an iPhone press release, then naturally you're going to be speaking to iPhone people. But we need to make that aware and be aware of the fact that those are the people that we're going to be hearing are people who are supporters of Apple, supporters of the iPhone. And if something doesn't sound quite right, if something doesn't read quite right, read further, investigate further, find other sources about it. But the best way to combat fake news is to read, and study. That's how we really want to make sure that we are writing good, appropriate news, is read, and find as much information as we can about a subject. So I hope you take this lesson to heart, especially as you start writing your blogs. consider both sides of a story, consider all of the sides of a story. You do not have any homework tonight regarding this lesson, but do not forget that you do have yesterday's homework due tonight at 11:59 if you have not finished it. If you have any more questions, by all means, feel free to get in touch with me. This is your time for sure to get in touch with me, ask me questions, and I'm more than happy to help you in any way that I can. Y'all have a good one.